Number 4. Me and the girlfriend were on our way to her parents' house. I was invited to Thanksgiving dinner with them, which was a huge honor for me since I'd only met her parents 3 times. I was also nervous since her grandparents and aunts and uncles would also be there who I had never met. We had a long trek from my house to her parents' house. It would be a good hour-long drive. About 45 minutes into the drive, we had to stop for gas. We pulled up into a literally dead Gulf station right off the highway, and I decided to fill up with premium for once to do my car a favor. Of course, it was cheaper to pay with cash, so I went inside with my head down as I dug my hand inside my wallet searching for a 10 and a 20, and when I pulled the bills out, I instinctively looked up and said, 30 on 2 please. But I stopped mid-sentence. There was no one there. I looked for a bell on the counter. None. I simply called out, "Anyone there?" There wasn't even a back door behind the counter that you would assume would lead to some kind of employees-only room. No, it was just completely empty. The only other door in this little gas station besides the entrance was the single bathroom, and that door was open, exposing the blackness from within the bathroom. I figured maybe whoever was manning the cash register may have just gone outside for something. I walked back outside and shrugged my shoulders at my girlfriend out of confusion. I looked around for maybe a porta potty or an ice machine or something that could be distracting a potential cashier, but there was nothing. It was a relatively small little station with foliage surrounding it in almost all directions. I figured maybe somebody could be behind the building smoking a bogey or a doobie, so I went back there as a final attempt. Nope, just a dumpster sitting under a dimly lit roof light. Ugh, I figured I'd just pay credit at this point and turned back. But as I did, somebody from out in the woods called over to me in a kind of whispery yell. My heart skipped a beat when I heard this. "Hey! Hey!" I kept hearing it from the woods. I took out my phone and flipped on the flashlight just to skim the outer tree line for anybody who could be hiding in there. As my now shaking hand rotated the phone slowly, the light momentarily revealed somebody from behind a tree. I took off back to the car and stepped on it out of there. My girlfriend was scared shitless just in reaction to my fear. I told her about the bizarre thing that just happened, and from that point on, she kept looking through the rearview mirrors just to make sure we weren't being followed. We pulled up to the next gas station we could find, this time one that actually had a cashier. I paid him $30 and began filling up. A van pulled up to the pump right behind mine, and a man wearing a cap stepped out staring intently at me. I tried to act as if I didn't notice him, but when it got to the point where he was staring at me for at least 20 seconds straight, I had to look at him and ask him if there was a problem. He finally turned away. The second I was done, I hopped back in the car and took off once more. We made it to her parents' house safely, and I don't believe we were followed. Now, I wouldn't have shared this story if it weren't for the fact that a few weeks later, I did some research and found out that a 33-year-old Indian man who worked at the gas station we had stopped at had been murdered and his body was stuffed in the woods behind the station. I immediately gave the police a tip about the guy who I saw at the station who was surely caught on camera. The following year on Thanksgiving, a similar murder happened at another gas station. We have since nicknamed him the Thanksgiving Killer. I fear only the worst once more this year, as he has still not been caught. Number 3. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. It was Black Friday, meaning me and my brothers were going video game shopping. Our first and only stop was Walmart. The place was absolutely mobbed, and being Walmart, it was mobbed with the wrong kinds of people. Gross, weird, and just creepy people everywhere trying to save a few bucks on already cheap products. We rode the escalators upstairs to the video game section. I was looking for the latest Call of Duty game personally, but my brothers were looking for some other game I don't remember. Then, out of nowhere, some creepy, heavy, oldish man who smelled like vomit walked up to me and said, "You like video games, huh?" "Yeah," I said. I began to slowly slide away just to show that I wasn't interested in conversation. "My son likes video games too," Maybe you should come over and play some with him. He really craves company." The man gave me a creepy smile. "Oh, no, I'm not from around town, sorry." That's all I could think of saying. I didn't even give him a chance to keep this conversation going. Hell, I wasn't obligated to stand there and talk to this guy. I simply gave him a smile and called my brother's name out while walking away just to seem distracted. I did a quick backwards glance. He was just staring at me as I walked away. I made it to the next aisle over and immediately felt comfort in being next to my brothers. I waited around until they finally found their game and we headed over to the checkout counters. The lines were insane. I knew it would probably take 10 to 15 minutes just to make it to the counters, so I took that opportunity to check out some of the jeans and t-shirt sales. At one point, I found myself in probably the most secluded corner of the store checking out some t-shirts when someone grabbed my arm hard. I thought it was my brother messing with me, so I turned around and told him to fuck off. But it wasn't him. It was the man. I started calling for help, screaming that I didn't know this man. Some people came over and stared, but that was about it. The man let go and walked away. I don't know what he was thinking or planning on trying in such a public place. I didn't tell my brothers what happened out of embarrassment, but they picked up on the fact that I was quiet afterwards. "It's nothing," I kept telling them. We got into my brother's Camaro, and when I sat down, I looked to the entrance of the Walmart. There he fucking was, sitting at the bench, facing me. As we were leaving the lot, we had to pass right in front of the store. I got one last look at the creepy man. His head moved ever so slightly to constantly face me, even through the car window at night. I gave him the finger, but it didn't seem to influence him in the slightest. That was the last I ever saw of him. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. Number 2. It was Black Friday 2013, and I decided to be one of those people who gets up at 3 a.m. to get some early deals. Home Depot was having crazy deals on artificial Christmas trees, so I wanted to get there early and buy one for my family. They opened their doors at 3 a.m. on the spot, 3 hours earlier than usual for Black Friday. Surprisingly, only me and one other guy were waiting to get in. I guess everyone else was at Best Buy or the mall. I found a nice 9-foot tall artificial Christmas tree, originally for $200, but at that moment half off for only $100. I asked one of the few employees working at that hour to help me carry the box to the checkout and then to my car. The parking lot was still surprisingly empty for Black Friday. I figured maybe I didn't have to come so early. I tipped the guy and got in my car ready to leave when someone knocked on my window. I lowered the window and some guy, mid-20s, beanie, black and tall, leaned into my window asking if I had change. I opened the little compartment in between seats where I normally keep change, and it was actually empty. I didn't want to have to hand him a 10, so I said, "Nah, man, sorry." He looked disappointed, and I actually felt bad. He then asked me if I could give him a lift to the nearest gas station. I was a bit nervous about letting a stranger in my car, but guess what? I let him in. He did not thank me, which kind of hurt, I guess because I'm a little sensitive. I asked him if he knew of any close-by gas stations. He just said, "Nah." A few seconds later, I asked him why he needed to go to a gas station, and I swear to God, he didn't answer. It's not like he didn't hear me. He just flat out ignored me. I stopped looking at him at that point because I was feeling a bit uncomfortable now. I kept driving down main and side roads, but there was no goddamn gas stations anywhere. I was trying not to look in his direction, but I could tell he was staring at me. Every turn I made, every stop sign I stopped at, he was staring at me. I was sweating now. This guy was freaking me out. I felt like at any moment he could just grab my throat and I'd be done for. At last, I could see a gas station just beyond a light which had just turned red. Why did it have to turn red just now? I thought to myself. I could still feel his stare. even as I looked the other way. I finally decided to sum up the balls and looked at him. I felt his cold, emotionless stare run straight through my eyes into my soul. Are you okay? I asked him. He ever so slightly nodded his head, almost not even noticeable. The light turned green, and I pulled into the gas station. He stepped out and stood by the sidewalk and watched me as I pulled away. When I got past the intersection, I laughed out of joy and the ridiculousness of the situation. But then I realized something. I patted myself down and then began to panic. I was missing something. My phone. I was only a few blocks away, so I made a U-turn and headed back to the gas station. He was gone already. I drove home and confirmed that my phone was missing. I knew I had left it in the cup holder of my car. My phone had all of my info on it. I contemplated calling the police, but I didn't. I couldn't even sleep that night in fear of some freak stranger having my address. The next night, after getting home from our 2-day delayed Thanksgiving dinner, I found my front door was open and my entire house was trashed. I called the police with my neighbor's phone. They didn't find him in there, but they found his prints everywhere. The only thing, the prints did not match anyone on record. Number 1. It was Thanksgiving. I had half the family over, along with the next door neighbors, Tom and his wife. They don't have a big family, so they used to come over to watch the game with us on Thanksgiving. After eating dinner, we all sat in the living room to watch football, except for my daughters Tracy and Michelle, who aren't into football. At the time, Michelle was only 13 years old, and Tracy was 16. During halftime, I decided to go up to Michelle's room to get her to come down. She finally budged and came down to the living room. Me, Tom, and a few in-laws went outside to smoke. Me and Tom talked about his son, Sam. Apparently, Sam had gone back home to be alone and watch movies. He had been with us earlier. Tom joked that he was probably just watching porn, though. I laughed. I stared up at one of the windows to my house, the window to Michelle's room. There was someone looking out the window. What the hell is Michelle doing back in her room? I thought. But then I realized that wasn't Michelle. In fact, I didn't know who the hell that was. I excused myself from the group and stormed back inside and upstairs to Michelle's room. Michelle followed after she saw me enter her room. Did someone just come in here? I asked. No, why? I looked around the room. It was completely empty. I nudged Michelle to go back downstairs while I turned off the lamp. We went back to the living room where the game would be starting up momentarily. I finally decided to ask everyone if anyone had been in Michelle's room at her window. Everyone either said no or shook their heads no. Someone had to be lying. I heard a slight thud come from upstairs in Michelle's room. I ran back upstairs, again with Michelle following me. I flicked on the lights in her room and spun around in a circle looking for someone. The sliding closet door was cracked open. I just realized. I thought I could see something through the crack. I squinted my eyes to try and see what it was. It was an eye. I screamed like a child for maybe 2 seconds, followed by Michelle. Relatives ran up into the room as I angrily slid open the closet and pulled out Sam, Tom's son. Tom ran up and found me basically holding Sam by the neck. Sam was holding some belongings of my daughter that I'd rather not talk about. This incident definitely scarred, maybe even ruined my friendship with Tom and his wife, and it's made me that much more protective over my daughter. If you're like most people, you've probably at one point had the experience of your alarm clock becoming a part of your dream before waking up. Or perhaps had some other sound like the TV you left on before falling asleep influence your dreams. But what would happen if reality influenced your dreams during a nightmare? Well, it would probably only add to the horror. While all of the stories on this list are creepy, some are more unexplainable than others. Here are 5 first-hand stories of people whose nightmares have strangely read into reality. Number 5. This story was submitted to me by Earl Feinhardt. It was a long and stressful day, so falling asleep was easy. I think a dream started to fade in around halfway through the night. It wasn't a pleasant dream. I'll try to describe it the best I could. I was in the woods outside of a giant castle. Everything was black except for the night sky, which had a hint of blue. I remember this horrifying sound coming from inside the castle, as if something were calling me. It's downright disturbing to think about it even now. The sound was some kind of demonic, hellish voice, and it echoed through the woods. I somehow knew it was coming from inside the castle, and yet it sounded as if the source of the sound was a few hundred feet away from me. This was not a lucid dream. I had no conscious control over myself, so I made my way to the castle. There were no doors. It was as if the inside of this castle was also the outside. I don't know how else to describe it. The sound of the demonic voice was no doubt getting louder, and as I walked the open corridors of the castle, the halls started to become more narrow, and I felt myself banging into the walls as I dragged myself along. The sounds of the screaming were coming from beyond a door on my left. I entered, and I swear to God, there was nothing but blackness in the room. And yet, I still felt myself moving closer to the sound. I banged into something, and that's when I woke up, hunched over my 4-year-old son's bed, who was crying and horrified. He had been screaming because he also had a nightmare, and I scared him even more, as he described the way I walked in and then stopped in front of his bed, slowly lowering myself closer to him. Number 4. This story was posted by a forum user named Joey Mancuso. I just want to point out before sharing my story that I am an atheist and do not believe in any kinds of miracles, gods, or anything of that sort. However, I still don't know how to explain this. I was having a really disturbing dream. It seemed to be Halloween night, and I was with my friends trick-or-treating. We hit 2 houses. The first one was normal from what I remember. When we rang the doorbell to a second house, the door opened on its own into a darkish blue living room. I stepped inside, and my friends were gone at this point. I looked around the room I was in. The door I had just entered from no longer existed. In fact, the whole room seemed to have rapidly changed appearance, a common occurrence in dreams. After exploring the house, I came to a room upstairs, even though I didn't remember climbing the stairs. On the wall I was facing was a giant framed picture. I mean, at least 10 meters long and 20 meters wide. The picture was of my 30-year-old cousin, who I hadn't seen in years. Her eyes were enlarged to an uncomfortable amount, and they followed me everywhere I went. The giant portrait suddenly cracked, and the rusty, scratchy, ear-piercing sound of the giant nails holding the portrait on the wall painfully filled my eardrums. The portrait started to fall off the wall, and I watched, completely frozen, as it fell on top of me. But before it could crush me, I was awake. It was maybe 5 in the morning. Minutes after waking up, my cell phone rang. I picked up. It was my uncle calling to tell me that my cousin had just overdosed on heroin and died. Number 3. I was having a nightmare that started off with me in my house reading a newspaper. Then the lights went out, and the dream started to focus on my trying to find out why the power was cut. The fuse box was apparently in the basement in this dream, which is, by the way, inaccurate to real life. I went down to the basement with a flashlight and opened up the fuse box. There was a sticky note inside, saying, "Go back upstairs to the red room." While still in the basement, I started to hear a moaning type sound coming from the boiler room / laundry room. My brain knew my childhood fears, and it seemed to be taking advantage of them in this nightmare. The door to the boiler room cracked open, and something poked its head out to look at me. I left the basement after seeing this, following the sticky note's orders. I went upstairs to the second floor of the house, and there was a glowing red door at the end of the hall, a door that doesn't actually exist in my real house. Now there was a disturbing echoing sound coming from beyond the door, and as I got closer, it became more clear that it was a voice chanting the number 314, 314. I opened the door, and there was just a chair in the room, facing the wall across from me. The room was as red as the glow that had been illuminating through the door. The voice chanting 314 was clearer now. It was an extremely creepy voice, almost feeling like it was speaking into my ear. I woke up abruptly, with my heart beating somewhat quickly. I grabbed my iPhone that was sitting on the desk next to me to check the time. It was 3:14 a.m. You may think I just saw a clock while half awake or something, but I have no digital clocks in my room. The only clock would be the one on my iPhone that was in the same position as I had left it before going to bed. To this day, I have no idea how my dream knew it was 3:14, or if there was supposed to be some kind of meaning behind it. Number 2. This one was from an Ask Reddit post. It was a night during the summer 2015. I was high out of my mind after a party. I was fortunate enough to not get caught by my parents as I walked to my room to get straight to bed. I was at the part of my high where I was just exhausted and wanted to get some sleep, and so I fell asleep in probably 10 minutes or less. Have you ever heard about that idea that smoking pot and then going to sleep high alters your dreams or gives you some kind of enhanced dreaming capabilities? Well, after this one, I won't be fighting that theory. I don't remember anything before this dream. It started out with me in the woods in the middle of the night. In real life, you would just be surrounded by trees and the sounds of night critters, nothing special. But being that this was a dream, it was much worse. There were ghostly wind sounds coming from everywhere. Instead of bug noises, there were wolf howls and sounds of footsteps coming from behind me. There was that magically horrifying feeling of a dream that you just can't describe, but it made it so much more than just being trapped in the woods. I found myself running away from the footsteps that were consistently the same distance behind me until reaching a building in the middle of the woods. Of course, I went inside and boarded the door shut with planks that seemed to have come out of nowhere. This dream seemed to have gone on forever, too long to describe it all, but to summarize, I was in that building, which turned out to be a house, and the footsteps that were following me from outside were circling the house. I tried to find a weapon, but the house was almost completely empty. Everything was black and white at this point. While sitting on a couch in the living room, one of the only pieces of furniture there was a shadow that appeared at the window, and shortly after, the figure standing outside knocked on the window. It kept knocking and knocking until I woke up, but the knocking didn't stop. I jumped out of bed when I realized someone was at my window, looking in and knocking. I squealed for my dad, and the figure at the window ran off. I'm still open to the possibility that my high hadn't completely worn off, and that it might have been a partial wake-up hallucination, but it was also so real that, at the same time, I have to believe it actually happened. The sound was real, and the figure at my window was real. My dad and I looked around the property to find no one. He told me I just had a bad dream and to go back to sleep. I hope he was right. Number 1. I was having a horrifying dream, possibly the most disturbing nightmare of my life. I was in my house, or the closest thing to my house that my dream could produce. Ironically enough, I was in bed in this dream, or at least I can only start remembering past the point of my lying in bed, and all of a sudden, the sound came from downstairs. I walked downstairs in the dark, not turning on any lights, to where I thought the sound was coming from. I was on my middle floor now. The dream was telling me to go downstairs to my laundry room, and so I did. But as I got there, expecting the noise to be louder and closer, it sounded like it was just as far as before. Now I was going upstairs to the kitchen, and it's strange. Outside of every window was complete blackness, not general nighttime darkness. There was nothingness. I think all that existed in this dream was my house. Now my dream started to suggest that the banging sounds were coming from upstairs, so I went back upstairs, and was eventually led to the attic door. It was surely beyond that door. I opened it. There was an old woman standing by a bunch of boxes. She was slowly but loudly slamming her hand on one of the boxes, producing an unnatural sound. I tried to quietly step back away from the attic, but the old woman turned around, opened her mouth twice as wide as anyone humanly could, reached out her arms, began to scream, and leaped toward me. That's when I woke up. I thought it was just a horrific dream, but when I heard a bang coming from downstairs, a bang similar to what I heard in my dream, I felt my heart completely drop. On my way downstairs, there was another bang. It was the front door. I got the butcher knife from my knife holder in the kitchen and crouched behind the door. I was waiting for the next time he would pound on the door and I would warn him to go away. I waited for a good minute in silence and finally decided to take a quick look through the window. There was somebody standing in my driveway. I couldn't tell if he was facing me or looking at me or not, but he was surely the one who was pounding on my door at 4 a.m. He walked away down the sidewalk moments after he must have noticed me. The pounding on my door was the kind of pounding you would expect from someone trying to break in a door, not to get a house owner's attention. I thought it was just crazy and horrifying that the pounding and banging from this potential robber or killer didn't wake me up, rather became the key point to a horrifying dream. Number 3. My dad has been an MTA Transit subway station manager for 35 years. With this job, there has to be a manager on duty at all times, so he's practically done every single possible shift throughout his career. That means he's done his fair share of night shifts. Most trains were completely empty throughout the night. He said it was the only nice part about doing the night shift. He has a series of funny and weird night shift stories to tell, but there's one downright horrifying one. My dad had just boarded the train to move to his office at another station. He was alone when he got on, which was at about 3 a.m. At the next station, someone boarded. My dad describes him as a white, tall and skinny man wearing a heavy jacket and beanie. He shot my dad a quick glance before sitting in the furthest corner away from him. My dad said that he felt uncomfortable as the guy kept looking up at him every so often. When my dad's stop came, he got off, as well as the other man. He walked to his office door, unlocked it, and looked behind him. The man in the jacket was pacing around only about 50 feet away. My dad stepped into his office, shut the door, locked it, and sat at his desk. 5 minutes later, someone started to try and turn the doorknob. After the person on the other side of the door realized it was locked, they started to knock softly. My dad called out, "Who is it?" And they responded, "I want to talk." He told whoever it was to go away. He says he knew trouble when he saw it. He had a good feeling it was the guy from the train, as this station at a time like this was apparently always completely empty. My dad told the guy to go away. He continued to knock for a good 5 minutes. My dad finally pulled up the security camera screens and brought up the camera pointed to his office door. Sure enough, there was the guy from the train, wearing the jacket and beanie. Coincidentally, as soon as my dad brought up the camera, the man walked away. So my dad did whatever his work consisted of for about half an hour in that office. Before leaving to catch the next train, he checked the camera to make sure that the weird guy wasn't out there. He locked up and walked down the stairs to the train platform, where he got on the train right away. Looking out the window, he saw the guy from before walking down the stairs to the platform, and then stepping on the train into the same car as my dad. He sat down on the opposite side, a few seats to the right. My dad tried to look away and pretend not to notice him, but he knew the guy was staring at him. He at one point gave in and stared back, giving a slight nod and smile in some sort of truce attempt, before looking away again. The man stared at my dad the whole ride to the next station, but my dad never looked back at him once after the first time. Now you may be asking, why didn't he try to forcibly get the guy to back off? Well, despite my dad's intimidating size, he's always been a complete teddy bear, no bark and no bite. Plus, he says he feared that guy was armed and that one small motion could lead to death. When the train stopped at the station, my dad practically ran all the way back up to the streets, constantly glancing over his shoulder, and yes, the man from the train was following him. My dad had to find the first public building still open to try and escape. He found a Wendy's that was open and stepped inside. He sat and watched as the guy following him walked up to the window, stopped, and stared my dad down through the glass for about 10 seconds before turning around and walking across the street and then down the sidewalks. My dad said he ate, waited a little longer, then left the Wendy's to get to his third and final station for the night. The scariest part, when my dad was in his third office, as he was checking the security cameras out of the paranoia of the situation, he caught the guy from the train pacing around the outside, only about 30 feet from his office. He then stopped, looked up at the camera, and according to my dad, literally froze and stared for no less than a minute. When he finally lowered his head, he walked away out of the station to never be seen by my dad again. My dad doesn't know if he was followed after leaving the Wendy's, but that would only make sense. The guy was clearly disturbed, possibly homeless and or dangerous, and who knows what he actually wanted with my dad. Number 2. Me and my 3 friends were in New York around Christmas time. We didn't finally decide to leave until about maybe 2 in the morning. We got on the first train that we could catch, and as expected, it was empty. We were pretty sobered up by then. Then there was a sudden commotion in the next car over. We had peeked through the glass in between the cars, and there were 2 hooded men, or maybe teenagers, standing obnoxiously close to a woman sitting in one of the seats who was screaming for help. I suggested that we go over and kick their asses, but as me and a buddy got a closer look, we saw they were armed with handguns. I pushed all my friends to get to the next car over, away from the armed men. I took a look back and saw one of the men pointing at us before starting to follow. We ran through at least 3 different cars with the men following us before the train finally stopped at the next station. We all booked it through the old station to the nearest place we could hide. I got separated from my friends, so I went to hide behind a garbage can. I could hear my chaser's shoes hitting the tiled floors, so I knew I had no time to find a better hiding spot. I peeked through the opening at the top of the bin. I could get a better look at them now. One was black, the other was Indian, and they were both really young looking. I was sure they were only trying to rob us, until I heard one of them say, "If you find them, kill them." I hope you understand why I almost gave away my position in reaction to hearing this. With a gasp and almost pulling the garbage bin down with me as I returned to cover, I consider it a miracle neither of them caught me. They left the area. I took notice that they didn't have their guns drawn at that moment. I ran in the opposite direction of the 2 and quickly caught my friends who were waving me over from behind a large pole. I took cover with them behind another pole not far from that one, and we waited for as long as we thought necessary. The big shock to this story, though, was when we caught glimpse of the woman from the train, who we thought was being threatened by the 2 men, walking over in the direction of the men and then calling something along the lines of, "Where are they? Don't tell me you didn't get them." The 2 men reappeared from beyond a corner, walking over to the woman. The rest of what they said was too low to pick up on. They walked back down the stairs to the platforms, and as we could guess, waited for another train to run their trap again. At the very least, we called the police and reported what was going on, but I have no idea if they were ever caught. Number 1. My name is Danny, I'm 22 years old, and this was the most horrifying experience of my life. I live and work in New York City, but I don't have a car, so my main mode of transportation is the subway. It was a Saturday night. I was on my way home from a party in the middle of the night. I did this about every other weekend, so I was completely fine with taking the subway alone at night. Walking down the steps, entering the underground without a soul in sight, it was always a bit chilling. This specific station was very tightly spaced. As I was walking, I could almost feel as if I were being watched or followed, along with the occasional echoing bang-type sound emitting from an unknown location. I was early for the train, so I sat on a bench and waited. This is something straight out of a horror movie. I heard this exact phrase. "Psst, over here, buddy." There was somebody standing on the tracks inside the tunnel, poking his head out and looking at me. It was a filthy-looking man, I'd say in his early 40s. He gave me a smile, a horrible yellow smile with at least 3 teeth missing, and I could tell that even from where I was sitting. I did the best I could to pay no attention to him, but he wouldn't go away. There was laughing coming from inside the tunnel, and then another disgusting-looking man stuck his face out as well. This man gave me a nasty smile as well, before telling me to come hang out with them in the tunnel. The way they stared at me though, their eyes wouldn't even move. It's as if their sight was locked onto me. I resumed doing the best I could to ignore them and just wait for the train. I noticed in my peripheral vision that one of the men moved away into the tunnel, returning moments later with another face. I had to look again. There was a third face, but this one was hunched over and lifeless. It looked like one of the men were holding the guy's face up. The sound of the train approaching felt like 1,000 pounds off my shoulders. I got up ready to board the train, but when I got closer to the edge of the platform, I nearly threw up at the sight. The 2 men were going back into the tunnel, but the second man in the back was holding something in his hand. A head. Just a head. Like a decapitated head. They disappeared from sight onto the side of the tunnel. As the train stopped, I got into the first car, planning on warning the conductor, but no later than after we left the station. I didn't want to be there a second longer. As the train began to move, I saw legs moving down the stairs to the platform, but that was it. I didn't get to see who it was. But what I did get to see, as the train moved into the tunnels, I caught a glimpse of a group of men, hunched up against the railing, inches away from the train window, and they were all looking right at me. I knocked on the conductor's door like a madman, screaming it was an emergency. He opened up and I explained what I just saw. He radioed to somebody in charge of the station, as well as another higher-up of the company, who I'm sure took care of it, or contacted the proper authorities or security, whatever. It seemed to take ages for my stop to come, but when it did, I practically had to hop in my walk from relief. I have since been to one party at the same friend's house, but I skipped that station. I decided it was worth it to take the extra long walk to the next station. I don't know if weird shit happens often in the subway at night. In my experience prior to this incident, it never did. But after this experience, I think I should say you should be extremely cautious when in an isolated place like a subway station late at night.